they're the words of Jesus and you're really trying, I mean, you bother to write a gospel, for crying out loud, you would have thought you would include some really, really important stuff, unless you missed it. So they're on the road in chapter 15, and the first 17 verses, there's one theme throughout. It's almost like parabolic, really, about the vine and the branches, and I'm sure you guys have read this many times before. But he starts walking along the road with them. And I see this a lot. The more I read the Gospels, and once I understand where they are and what's going on, he uses things that people can understand and know around him to bring about kingdom truths. And he does the same thing here. They're walking by vineyards, and he looks, and he gives his last compound, I am. When I say compound, John is the one who has, I am the light of the world, I am the bread of life, I am the door, I am the good, all the I ams. We call them compounds because it's not just I am, like to the Samaritan woman, or it's an I am something. I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world. So there's 7 of them in John. The 7th one is I am the true vine. That's how he begins his walk and his talk with them. And so he's he's using these vines to bring about a profound truth about himself. And he's been talking about relationship all through the 13th and 14th chapter. This is not a new subject. He was talking about relationship, but now he's enhancing the relationship and taking it to a different level. He's not talking about visitation. He's talking about a habitation of an abiding presence and their relationship. And he starts to stress bearing fruit, the vine and the branches. The word bearing, B-E-A-R, bearing fruit is carrying it. It could be anything. If I asked you to take this into the kitchen to Carol, and you did, you would be carrying it for me. I give it to you, you carry it. Which means for those of you who might be trying to grunt out fruit, you're wasting your time, because basically God's going to give you what it is you're supposed to do. And then you do it. You bear it. You bring it to fruition, kind of thing. You bear the fruit. You don't create it. Like the servants with the wine. They don't do anything but what he tells them. They pick up the water. Jesus turns it to wine. They carry it. They didn't create. The only thing they do was they bear it. Chapter 15, let's start with verses 4 and 5.
Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing.
I mean, it's about as clear as it can get. If you've got half an ounce of imagery, and you can picture stuff, it's quite clear what he's saying. Would you read verses 8 and 9?
My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love.
Seems to be a necessary element of this abiding stuff. Love. That's where we live. We live in love. Love lives in us. Verses 16 and 17.
You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give to you. This I command you, that you love one another.
We could spend a long time. We're not going to, because it's a relatively simple picture and a simple truth about bearing fruit. Jesus talked about good works all through his ministry. He started in the Sermon on the Mount, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. He was very much into good works. Protestants have slammed it a bit. Oh, your salvation's not based on good works. Well, no, it's not, but why don't you try some? Not for anything. No, we're not saved by our works. We're saved by the work of Jesus Christ. But how about doing what he said and letting your light, how about some good works that we can show forth the praises of him who called us out of darkness into his marvelous? I mean, how about that? Paul talks about good works all over the place. Jesus talked about his own good works. He talked about trees being, that you can tell a good tree because they produce good fruit. You can tell a bad tree, they produce bad fruit. This is not rocket science. These guys, whatever they are, farmers, and yeah, I understand that. I get that. And he's talking about that in our lives as well. In the 10th chapter of John, when he's talking about the works that he has been doing, he hasn't been doing them. His Father's been doing them, and they bear witness of his Father. So this witnessing thing and works-oriented witness The works themselves bear witness of what I'm doing. And then he asked them, I've done many good works. He's not bragging. He's just saying, I've done a lot of good works. It's peculiar that you want to stone me. For which one are you stoning me, or which ones? And they're saying, well, it's not because of your good works. We like those good works, but you're calling yourself God, really. But so he's in that kind of a situation. I said earlier in the Last Supper, show us the Father, that kind of thing. And Jesus' response to Philip is, have I been with you so long, and you're still not seeing the Father? The words that I've been speaking have been revealing him. They're not my words. They come from the Father. The works themselves. If you don't believe me, and if you haven't caught it, at least look at the works. Because that's exactly what he said. Let your light so shine before men that they shall see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And it is crucial that they connect with their Father in heaven. Otherwise, they are like orphans. When he says, I don't want to leave you as an orphan, that's a nice way of referring to all those people that have just been walking by Jesus, or they grabbed their miracle, thank you very much, I'm on my way. And he said they're orphans. They're like orphans. They carry an orphan spirit. In Ephesians 2, verse 10, these are great verses.
For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them.
Did you ever think of it like that? I'm sure you've read the verse before. There's something prepared, waiting for you to do it that's already been prepared. He's just waiting for someone, personally, each one of us, to bear it, kind of thing. Paul's got a very interesting way of looking at good works, that God's already done it. You're going forward, getting hold of it, and delivering it. It's quite simple, really. In Colossians, the first chapter, verses 9 and 10,
for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God.
Well, that's a mouthful, isn't it, those two verses? How's that for? I'm thinking of you. But he makes it very clear. This is, Holy Spirit's with you. And Titus is packed with talking about good works. There's at least 5 or 6 different places. So Paul is really big on this. But in the 3rd chapter, just read the 8th verse and then the 14th verse.
This is a faithful saying, and these things I will that you affirm constantly, that you which have believed in God might be careful to maintain good works. These things are good and profitable to men. And let ours also learn to maintain good works for necessary use, that they may not be unfruitful.
So the connection's always being made between good works, being fruitful, that kind of thing. Like I said, it's a huge subject. We're not getting into the whole thing. The point is that Jesus is talking to them about good works, about bearing fruit. Paul in Galatians 5 talks about works of the flesh and fruit of the Spirit, and breaks it down as to what's what kind of thing. He's not talking about gifts. He's talking about fruit. The Spirit's fruit that he gives us to bear. He makes it kind of simple. If you live in the flesh, you're going to fulfill the lusts of the flesh. If you live in the Spirit, you walk in the Spirit, then you'll bear much fruit. You'll bear the fruit of the Spirit. And another way I picture that is every time I say or do something inappropriate, I use myself in my marriage, let's say, and I say something I wished I wouldn't have. I didn't have to, number one. The Spirit of God is in me. He's empowered me in those moments when I'd rather jump into the flesh, which is where sin dwells, by the way, which is what Paul talks about. If you get into the flesh, don't be surprised when you sin. That's a good sign that you're in the flesh when you sin. If you didn't know it before, after you sin, it's a good sign. Guess what? You know why you just sinned? Because while we're going to John and saying, well, I must not be a Christian, because I know you're a Christian. You just got into the flesh, and you put yourself under the rule of sin. And sin says, I'm glad to have you today. I missed you. But Paul is saying, if you don't get into the flesh, if you're in the Spirit, then at that moment, when your big mouth is running off, Steve Cerone, when your big mouth is running off, you didn't have to do that. I was trying to get you to bear some love, some peace, some gentleness. I was holding it right there for you. Well, you wouldn't have that because you're not interested in bearing. You're interested in doing what you want to do. The Spirit is giving me something for somebody else to eat. That's what fruit is, isn't it? For someone else to eat and be nourished by. If I would just pay attention and not keep jumping back into the flesh where no good thing dwells. Paul's talking about that. And I was thinking about it this last week. If you ask a child whether they want a gift or they want to work for something, how many people think that the child would say, oh, I'd rather work for whatever you give me? That's my idea of a good time. We all know well enough that kids love gifts. Don't believe me. Listen to them at Christmas. What'd you get? What'd you get? That's why I love to ask kids, and adults as well, because adults are a bit like that too. What'd you get? What'd you get? And it's like, I like to ask people, what'd you give? Children are much better at gifts. They rather stay in that place. They don't want to bear. They don't want to work. Here, take this to mommy. Pick up your dirty laundry and take it to the laundry room. Save your mother a few steps, Oh, do I have to? No, you don't have to, but I'll tell you this much. If you loved her, you would. And that's what Jesus is hitting the nail on the head. If you love me, you'll keep my word. If you love me, you'll remain in me, you'll abide in my love. If you love me. So it becomes really clear. For those of us who are confused about Romeo and Juliet kind of love, what that's about, for those of us who are confused about love, because that's a very confusing story, Romeo and Juliet. Telling people that if you die for someone, that's love. Or if you die with someone, that's love. No, if you die for someone, that's love. Dying with someone is nothing but stupid. Dying for someone is the greatest demonstration of love that the world has ever seen. No sense jumping over ships with each other. If you lose somebody, you go and find someone to save. That's an act of love. Servants bear fruit. The thing is, children don't always want to work and serve. In John chapter 2, which I've referred to once already, when they carried the wine, Jesus calls them servants. The servants are called to bear something, to carry something, and they do. The P that I'm talking about, I don't think I've said it yet, but it's producing. That's our fourth P today in chapter 15. He's calling them to production, to bearing fruit, to produce something into a situation, to impart it and bring it into a situation.